Don't Wait Alone. 5 True Train Station Horror Stories. Most people fear the woods at night. They fear the basement of an old house or the silence of a graveyard. But there is a specific kind of dread that only exists on a train platform at 2 a.m. It's a liminal space, a place designed to be crowded, yet when it's empty, it feels like it belongs to something else. The cold wind howling through the tunnels, the flicker of fluorescent lights that have seen things no one was meant to witness, and the realization that while you're waiting for the last train home, you might not be as alone as you think. Tonight, I'm bringing you 5 supposedly true stories from people who learned the hard way that the tracks lead to more than just the next station. They lead into the dark. I am Mr. Horrorman. If you enjoy the chilling realism of creators like Mr. Nightmare, but you're looking for a deeper descent into the macabre, you've found your new home. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. It's the only way to ensure you don't miss our nightly excursions into the unknown. And if you've ever seen something unexplainable on your commute, tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Now, hold your ticket tight. The train is coming, but you might not want to get on. Sarah was 22, a graduate student at the University of Chicago. Her life was measured in credit hours, overpriced coffee, and the rhythmic thump-thump of the L train. On this particular Tuesday in November, the library had been her cage until the doors locked at midnight. The air outside was Chicago cold. It's a cold that doesn't just touch you, it bites. It searches for gaps in your scarf and stings your eyes until they water. Sarah hurried toward the elevated station, her boots crunching on the salt-stained pavement. The station was a skeleton of iron and wood. The ticket agent's booth was dark, the glass reflecting Sarah's own tired face. She swiped her Ventra-card, the mechanical beep sounding like a gunshot in the silence, and climbed the stairs. The platform was an island in the sky. To her left and right, the city stretched out in a grid of orange streetlights and dark windows. Sarah stood under the heat lamp, but it was broken, clicking uselessly like a dying cricket. She wasn't alone. About 40 yards down the platform, near the very end where the shadows of the billboard fell, stood a man. He was wearing a tan trench coat. It was a heavy, old-fashioned thing, stained at the hem and far too long for his frame. A baseball cap was pulled low, shielding his face from the security cameras. He didn't have a bag. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was just standing at the very edge of the yellow tactile strips, staring down into the dark throat of the tunnel. Sarah did what we all do. She looked at him for a second, then immediately looked away. She didn't want to engage. She didn't want to be the rude one, but she also didn't want to be noticed. She sat on a wooden bench, pulled out her phone, and saw the dreaded red bar, 4% battery. The city hummed, the wind howled, and the man in the tan coat didn't move an inch. At 12:45 a.m., the first train arrived. It was a southbound, not Sarah's train. She needed the northbound toward Rogers Park. The southbound train arrived with a screech that set Sarah's teeth on edge. The brakes threw off a scent of burning metal and dust. The train was almost empty, just a few scattered souls leaning against the windows. The doors hissed open, directly in front of the man in the tan coat. Sarah watched from the corner of her eye. She expected him to step in, to find a seat, and to disappear from her night. But he didn't move. The ding-dong of the closing doors echoed through the station. The doors stayed open for 30 seconds. Then they closed. The train pulled away, the red taillights disappearing into the distance. The man was still there. Sarah felt a small, cold finger of dread trace its way down her spine. Why would anyone wait in sub-zero temperatures for a train only to let it go? Maybe he was on the wrong platform, but he didn't move toward the stairs to switch sides. He just stood there. Then he turned his head. It wasn't a fast movement. It was slow, mechanical. He didn't turn his body. just his neck. He looked toward Sarah. Under the brim of his hat, Sarah couldn't see eyes, just two dark hollows where the light failed to reach. He stared at her for a full minute. Sarah's heart began to pick up speed. A frantic drum against her ribs. She looked back at her phone. 3% battery. The city hummed, the wind howled, and the man in the tan coat didn't move an inch. From a hand, it simply appears in mid-air and hits the floor of the train car. Some things don't want to be caught on camera. Some things just want to be felt. Thank you for listening to this account. If you're still here, it means you have the stomach for what's coming next. Like the video if you're never taking the last train home again. Subscribe to Mr. Horror Man to ensure you're never alone in the dark. And remember, if you're on the platform tonight and you see someone miss their train, don't wait around to see if they miss the next one. Story 2. The ventilation shaft. The air we breathe up here on the surface is taken for granted. It's recycled by trees, filtered by the wind, and warmed by the sun. But the air underground? That's different. Underground, the air is heavy. It's thick with the dust of ground down stone, the smell of copper from the tracks, and the exhales of a million commuters who have passed through the tunnels over the last century. But if you go deep enough, past the active lines, past the maintenance tunnels, into the ghost stations of the London Underground, the air changes again. It becomes stagnant. It becomes ancient. And sometimes it begins to smell like something that hasn't breathed in a long, long time. I am Mr. Horror Man. My competitor, Mr. Nightmare, tells you stories that happen in your neighborhood. I'm here to take you to the places the map makers forgot. I don't just want to scare you. I want you to feel the weight of 500 feet of earth pressing down on your chest. I want you to feel the rust under your fingernails. Tonight's story is about an urban explorer who thought he knew the city's secrets. He found a ventilation shaft that shouldn't have existed, and he found the reason why some parts of the London Underground were never meant to be reopened. Before we descend, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Join our descent into the macabre. And if you've ever found a door in your city that was welded shut for no reason, tell me about it in the comments. I believe every word. Now, take a deep breath while you still can. We're going down. Narrator. The story comes to us from a man who goes by the handle Ghost. He was part of a small, elite circle of urban explorers in London. People who didn't just look for abandoned buildings, but sought the deep veins of the city. It was August. London was suffering through a heat wave that turned the subway into an oven. Ghost and his partner, Mark, had spent months researching South Kentish Town, a station closed since 1924. But their target wasn't the station itself. It was a discrepancy they found on an old 1950s engineering blueprint. There was a ventilation shaft labeled Shaft 13B that appeared on the old maps but was missing from every modern digital scan. If the city hides a vent, it's because there's something in the lungs they don't want us to see, Mark had said. At 2 a.m., they found the entrance. It was tucked behind a heavy iron plate in a maintenance alleyway near Camden. It didn't have a modern lock. It was secured with a massive rusted deadbolt that looked like it belonged on a Victorian prison cell. With enough grease and a crowbar, the bolt gave way with a sound that Ghost described as a metallic scream. They stepped inside. The heat of the London night was instantly replaced by a biting, unnatural chill. They were standing at the top of a vertical shaft. A rusted iron ladder descended into a darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow the light from their high-end LED torches. "How deep do you think it goes?" Ghost whispered. "Only one way to find out," Mark replied. They began the descent. For 30 minutes, the only sound was the clack-clink of their boots on the rungs and the heavy thud of their own hearts. Ghost looked up. The square of light at the top, the surface world, was now nothing more than a tiny, distant star. Then the ladder ended. They weren't at the bottom. They were on a small, rusted metal grating. To their left was a horizontal ventilation duct. It was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide and 2 feet high. It was a crawl space. And from deep within that duct, Ghost heard it for the first time. Clack, clack, clack. It was rhythmic, methodical, the sound of something hard hitting something soft. Mark looked at Ghost. His face was pale in the torchlight. "That's not a train," Mark whispered, "and that's not a pipe knocking." The sound was coming from the very heart of the machinery, and like fools, they decided to follow it. To understand the horror of a ventilation shaft, you have to understand the loss of control. In a tunnel, you can turn around, you can run, but in a 2-foot-high metal box, you are a prisoner of your own body. You move on your elbows, your chest scrapes the ceiling. If you panic, your muscles expand and you become wedged, a living plug in a dead pipe. Ghost went first. Mark followed. The metal was freezing, coated in a layer of black, oily soot that stained their clothes and skin instantly. The smell began to change. The metallic tang of the underground was being replaced by something organic, something sweet, like rotting lilies mixed with the copper of dried blood. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was louder now. Every time it hit, Ghost could feel the vibration through the floor of the duct. "Mark, we should turn back," Ghost said, his voice echoing strangely, sounding muffled and distant even though Mark was only inches behind his feet. "We're almost to the junction," Mark urged. "Look at the air." Ghost shone his light ahead. The dust in the air wasn't drifting, it was being sucked forward. The vent was drawing breath, but there were no fans running, no electricity. The station had been dead a century. Then Ghost's light hit something that didn't belong in a ventilation shaft. It was a shoe, a single leather child boot sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the duct. It looked brand new, not a speck of dust on it. Ghost pushed past it, his heart hammering. Then he saw another, a woman's high heel, then a man's brogue. The vent was lined with shoes, dozens of them, then hundreds. They were tucked into the corners, lined up along the ridges of the metal. It was a gallery of the missing. "Mark, these are real," Ghost gasped. He picked up a sneaker. It was damp. The clacking sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, expectant silence. It felt like the duct was listening to them. Then a voice drifted through the vent. It didn't come from ahead. It sounded like it was coming from the very metal itself. "I'm almost finished with the souls," the voice whispered. It was a wet, raspy sound, the sound of a throat full of gravel. Ghost froze. He wanted to scream, but the air in his lungs felt like lead. He shone his light further down the shaft. The duct opened into a small circular chamber, a junction where 4 vents met. In the center of the chamber, a man was sitting, but he wasn't a man, not really. He was unnaturally thin, his limbs so long they had to be folded in multiple places just to fit in the cramped space. He was barefoot, his skin the color of a mushroom grown in total darkness. He was sitting cross-legged, and in his lap was a heavy iron anvil. He was holding a hammer, and in his other hand, he held a piece of leather that looked sickeningly like a human face. The room was filled with thousands of shoes. They were piled to the ceiling. The shoemaker turned his head. His neck crunched with the sound of breaking dry wood. He had no eyes, just smooth, pale skin where his sockets should have been, but he looked right at Ghost. "You have very fine skin on your feet," the shoemaker said. He tapped his hammer against the anvil. Clack, clack. Size 11. Yes, a perfect fit for the collection. He began to move. He didn't crawl, he flowed. His limbs unfolded like a spider's, clicking into place as he lunged towards the opening of the duct where Ghost was trapped. "Run!" Ghost screamed. He tried to back up, but he was wedged. Mark, sensing the panic, began to scramble backwards, his boots kicking Ghost in the face. Ghost felt a cold, leathery hand grab his ankle. The grip was like an iron vice. He felt a sharp, searing pain as the shoemaker's long, jagged fingernails dug into his Achilles tendon. "Stay," the voice hissed. "It only hurts until the skin is off." Ghost kicked with his other foot, a blind, desperate strike. He felt his heel connect with something soft, a nose, an eye he didn't know. The grip loosened for a split second. Ghost scrambled backwards with a strength born of pure, primal terror. He didn't care about the skin he was leaving behind on the jagged metal edges of the vent. He didn't care about the darkness. He just moved. He reached the ladder. Mark was already halfway up, climbing with a frantic, animalistic speed. Ghost grabbed the rungs and hauled himself up, his injured legs screaming in protest. He looked down. The shoemaker was at the bottom of the ladder. He stood in the torchlight, his pale, eyeless face tilted upward. He didn't climb. He just held up Ghost's shoe, the one he had managed to pull off during the struggle. "I'll keep it warm for you," the shoemaker whispered, "until you come back for the other one." Ghost and Mark made it to the surface. They slammed the iron plate shut and welded it with a portable torch they had in their van. They didn't go to the police. What would they say? That a blind giant was making shoes out of people in the London Underground. But Ghost changed after that night. He stopped exploring. He stopped going out after dark. Because every time he walks over a subway grate in the city, every time he hears the rhythmic thump-thump of a train passing beneath his feet, he hears it. Clack, clack, clack. And sometimes, when he's alone in his apartment, he smells it. That sweet, cloying scent of rotting lilies and old leather. He looked at his feet this morning. On his left ankle, there are 4 circular scars, perfect imprints of a long-fingered hand. And he realized that the shoemaker wasn't just a monster in a vent. He was a craftsman, and a craftsman always finishes his work. Thank you for joining me for this descent into the deep. This has been Mr. Horror Man. If you're still breathing, hit that like button. If you want to see what else is hiding in the dark, subscribe. Mr. Nightmare tells you that the world is a scary place. I'm here to tell you that the world is much, much deeper than you think. And once you go down, you never truly come back up. Good night, and watch your step. Story 3. The Lady on the Tracks. Every transit system has a heartbeat. It's a rhythmic, mechanical pulse made of steel, electricity, and the collective breath of millions of commuters. But if you stay long enough, after the last train has rattled into the depot and the station gates have been chained shut, the heartbeat changes. It slows down. It becomes a heavy, labored thumping. And you start to realize that the tunnels aren't empty. They're just waiting for the lights to go out. I am Mr. Horror Man. My competitor, Mr. Nightmare, tells you stories about the stranger at your door or the shadow in your woods. But I'm here to tell you that the most terrifying places are the ones you walk through every single day without looking down. I'm here to tell you that the ground beneath your feet is hollow, and it's filled with more than just trains. Tonight's story is a first-hand account from a man named Arthur. He was a 61-year-old when he took the job at the terminal. He was a man who appreciated the uncomplicated nature of the night. After 30 years in the NYPD, he wanted a job where the biggest conflict was a broken vending machine or a homeless man sleeping in the waiting area. The terminal at night is a cathedral of silence. The high vaulted ceilings trap the sound of your own footsteps and play them back to you seconds later. Arthur worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, the graveyard watch. For the first 6 months, it was exactly what he wanted. He would sit in the security booth, drink bitter coffee from a thermos, and watch the grid of 16 monitors. Most of them showed empty hallways, flickering escalators, and the long, dark stretches of the platforms. But then, there was Monitor 14. Monitor 14 covered the entrance to Track 9. It was a deep, level track, rarely used for passenger service anymore. It was mostly for freight and equipment moves. It was poorly lit, the walls covered in decades of calcified grime and leaking pipes. On a Tuesday in October, around 3:15 a.m., Arthur saw her for the first time. She was standing on the platform, right at the very edge of the yellow safety strip. She was wearing a bright cornflower blue dress, a style that looked like it belonged in a 1940s film. Her hair was pinned back in perfect, tight curls. She was holding a small, brown leather suitcase. Arthur leaned in close to the screen. The footage was grainy, but she looked as solid as the concrete she was standing on. "Hey, Gary," Arthur said to his partner, who was dozing in the chair next to him. "We got a trespasser on Track 9. Looks like a lady. Wrong place to be." Gary grunted, blinking his eyes open. He looked at the monitor. Track 9. Nobody goes down there. How did she get past the gate? "I don't know," Arthur said, reaching for his radio. "But she's heading for the tunnel." On the screen, the lady in blue didn't look left or right. She simply stepped off the platform and onto the tracks. She walked with a strange, fluid grace, her suitcase swinging slightly in her hand. She walked directly into the black maw of the tunnel. "She's going to hit the third rail," Gary shouted, suddenly wide awake. They both watched, waiting for the flash of blue sparks, waiting for the smell of ozone that meant a body had made contact with 700 volts of death. But there was nothing. She walked right over the rail, as if it were a shadow. She disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, her blue dress the last thing to fade into the black. Arthur and Gary didn't hesitate. It was their job to prevent suicides and accidents. They grabbed their heavy maglights and headed for the service stairs. The descent to Track 9 felt longer than usual. The air became colder with each flight of stairs, the smell of damp earth and old oil thickening in Arthur's throat. When they reached the platform, it was empty. Arthur shined his light onto the tracks. The beams of their flashlights were swallowed by the tunnel. "Lady," Arthur shouted, "MTA security! Come out of the tunnel, it's not safe." Only his own echo answered him. They climbed down onto the tracks. Walking on the ballast, the heavy stones between the rails, is difficult. Every step shifted, the sound of grinding rock loud in the unnatural stillness. Arthur stayed clear of the third rail, his heart hammering against his ribs. They walked about 50 yards into the tunnel. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Arthur noticed that the walls here were weeping. A thick black liquid oozed from the cracks in the masonry, smelling of iron and rot. "Arthur, look," Gary whispered. About 20 feet ahead, the beam of Gary's light hit something on the ground. It was a ribbon, a single silk ribbon in the same cornflower blue as the lady's dress. Arthur picked it up. It felt impossibly soft, but it was cold, colder than the air. And as he held it, he felt a strange vibrating sensation in his palm, like the ribbon was humming. Suddenly, they heard it, the sound of a train. But it didn't sound like a modern electric train. It was the heavy, chuffing rhythm of a steam locomotive, the screech of iron wheels, the roar of fire. The tunnel began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling, coating Arthur's shoulders. A bright white light appeared around the bend, growing larger and more intense by the second. "Get in the alcove!" Arthur yelled, grabbing Gary by the jacket and shoving him into a narrow maintenance niche in the wall. They pressed themselves against the cold stone as the train thundered past. But as it passed, Arthur realized there was no wind, no heat, no smell of coal smoke. There was only a crushing, absolute silence that seemed to vibrate his teeth. He looked through the train. It was translucent, a ghost made of light and thunder. And in every window of the phantom cars, he saw faces, dozens of people in 1940s clothing, their faces pressed against the glass. They weren't screaming, they were staring. And in the very last car, he saw her, the lady in blue. She was sitting by the window, her suitcase on her lap. She turned her head and looked directly at Arthur. Her eyes weren't eyes. They were hollow, dark tunnels that went on forever. She didn't speak, but he heard her voice in the very center of his brain. "I'm still waiting for him, Arthur. Are you him?" The train vanished. The light, the sound, the vibration, all of it gone in an instant. The tunnel returned to its stagnant, oppressive silence. Derry was shaking so hard, his flashlight was dancing against the wall. "What was that, Art? What the hell was that?" "We need to get out of here," Arthur said, his voice trembling. They ran back to the platform, scrambled up the edge, and didn't stop until they were back in the brightly lit security booth. They didn't tell their supervisor. They knew they'd be sent for a psych eval or drug tested. But Arthur couldn't let it go. The next day, Arthur went to the transit archives. He spent hours scrolling through microfilm and yellowed newspapers. Finally, he found it. November 1945, the end of World War II. The terminal had been packed with returning soldiers. One of the trains, an express carrying hundreds of men back to their families, had suffered a catastrophic brake failure as it entered Track 9. It had slammed into a stationary engine at 60 miles per hour. 42 people had died. Among the dead was a young woman named Clara. She hadn't been on the train. She had been standing on the platform waiting for her fiancé, a paratrooper she hadn't seen in 3 years. When the train derailed, it had surged onto the platform. Clara had been pinned beneath the first car. Witnesses said she had lived for 20 minutes, clutching a small leather suitcase, asking everyone who passed if they had seen her Johnny. She had been wearing a cornflower blue dress. Arthur felt a sick weight in his stomach, but there was one detail in the report that made his blood run cold. The paratrooper, Johnny, hadn't been on the train. He had died in a hospital in France 2 weeks before the war ended. Clara had been waiting for a ghost, and now she was a ghost herself, caught in a loop of waiting and wreckage. But Arthur realized something else. Every year, on the anniversary of the crash, a security guard at the terminal had gone missing. Not many, maybe one every 5 or 6 years. The police always assumed they had just walked off the job or moved away. Arthur looked at the dates. Every missing guard had been working the night of October 24th. Tonight was October 24th. Arthur tried to call in sick, but they couldn't find a replacement. He told himself it was just a story. He told himself he was an old man with an overactive imagination. But when he arrived at the station, the air felt different. It was charged like the moments before a lightning strike. At 3:15 a.m., he looked at monitor 14. She was there, Clara, the lady in blue. But she wasn't standing on the platform anymore. She was standing directly in front of the security booth camera. She was inches from the lens. She wasn't looking into the tunnel. She was looking at Arthur. The monitor began to bleed. A dark black liquid, the same liquid from the tunnel walls, started to drip from the top of the screen. "Arthur," the intercom crackled. It wasn't Gary. Gary was in the break room. "Johnny is here, Arthur. He's in the tunnel. He says he's lonely. He says he needs a partner for the long ride home." The door to the security booth hissed open. The smell of ozone and wet earth filled the room. Arthur stood up, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. He didn't want to move, but his body wasn't his own. He walked out of the booth. He walked down the stairs. He walked toward Track 9. He saw Clara standing at the end of the platform. She held out her hand. Her skin was pale, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. "It's time to board, Johnny," she whispered. Arthur wanted to scream that he wasn't Johnny. He wanted to run. But when he looked into her hollow eyes, he didn't see death. He saw peace. He saw a world where the night shift never ended and the trains always ran on time. He took her hand. The last thing Gary saw when he returned from the break room was Arthur's flashlight lying on the edge of the platform of track 9. It was still on, its beam pointing into the dark tunnel. And next to the flashlight, sitting perfectly flat on the concrete, was a single cornflower blue silk ribbon. Arthur was never found. The MTA closed track 9 permanently the following year, citing environmental hazards. They bricked up the entrance and removed it from the roofings. But sometimes, if you're standing on the platform of track 8 late at night and the station is very quiet, you can hear it. The sound of a steam engine, the whistle of a train that hasn't existed for 80 years, and a woman's voice, soft and sweet, saying, "Watch your step, Johnny, we're almost home." Thank you for listening to this account. This has been Mr. Horror Man. If this story made you look twice at the shadows on your commute, hit the like button. Subscribe to join our descent into the underground. And remember, the third rail isn't the only thing that can kill you in the dark. Mr. Nightmare tells you that the world is a scary place. I'm here to tell you that the world is much, much older than you think. And the past never really leaves.